Oi, oi, alright, how's it going? I'm Grant, you're you. This is the Doodle Review, here today with a new episode of Ulterior Underground. It's a series in which we deep dive on artists, bands, albums and artifacts from across the spectrum of alternative music from the 80s, 90s and 2000s. And back in the 2000s, you'll recall many bands were taking it back to the garage, to the basement, to the streets, giving us a whole era of indie rock, now endearingly referred to as indie sleaze. But while most people were doing that, the band that I'm going to talk to you about today were taking their music to the psychedelic stratosphere. Yes, today we are doing a retrospective on the space rock champions of the 2000s, Secret Machines. Now, I was very fortunate recently to speak to Josh Garza, the Machines' distinctive drummer, at length about the band's earliest days and their releases, and I'll be putting that full conversation out in the next week or so. But just while I'm putting the finishing touches on the edit to that conversation, I wanted to put together this kind of retrospective that would hopefully give maybe some newcomers to the band an understanding of the context and the history of what made them so cool, give you my thoughts on their catalogue, with a few tasters of that conversation with Josh dotted throughout. So subscribe so you don't miss out when the full conversation drops, and if you're watching from the future, just check in the description below. The link for it might already be there. Okay, so who are the Secret Machines? Well, they've always operated as a three-piece, but there have been four members over the course of their career. The core trio that launched the group were brothers Brandon and Benjamin Curtis, with Brandon on bass, keys and lead vocals, and Benjamin on guitars and backing vocals. And then these two were then joined by a longtime friend and previous collaborator, the mighty Josh Garza, on drums. Over the course of their career, they would also work closely with guitarist Phil Carnett. We'll get into the circumstances of, the lineup changes a little later in this video, but before we get there, before we even get to the Machines' first release, we have to take it back. We have to take it right back to the late 90s, before the band even started. And 1997 to 2000 was a bit of an interesting period for rock music. Grunge had sort of hit its peak, and the garage rock or indie revival was still kind of a few years out. Alternative rock was still a fairly significant part of the wider music culture, but the Seattle sound had now lost its vice-like grip on the genre as a whole, creating space for dozens of other scenes and subgenres to bubble up. And obviously these scenes always existed through the peak of grunge, but while grunge was the dominant force in music, it diverted a lot of talent away from those smaller niches, because either up and coming artists were trying to ride that wave to success, or labels were kind of forcing promising young bands to adopt the in vogue sound. So in 96, 97, 98, with grunge faded and no immediate force to replace it, a wider variety of bands and scenes began to emerge, and one such scene was the neo-psychedelic indie rock scene of Dallas, Texas, that spawned bands like Bedhead, Tripping Daisy, and later the Polyphonic Spree.
Dallas is, in Texas in general, there's always an onslaught of underground rock and roll, and it was really, that's how I actually met Brandon. He was in another band, I was in some other band, and then at some point, you end up crossing paths, and he wanted to sort of branch out, and he saw me playing drums. He was like, hey, let's, he wanted what I was doing to be a part of what he was doing. But I was in the middle of something. So it was like, so I invited him into what I was doing. So it was just that kind of scene where there's like, at some point, eventually everybody knew everybody.
Brandon and Benjamin Curtis were playing in UFO FU, with Benjamin on drums, Brandon on bass and vocals, and Joseph Butcher rounding out the trio on guitar and vocals. This band are really cool, and one of my favorites that I discovered through this research process. They remind me of kind of an alt rock indie Bad Religion. They're not as heavyweight, but there's definitely like a punk energy and a snark to this group that kind of sets them apart from a lot of others in the scene. They put out a few 7-inch singles and one self-titled album in 97 that's definitely worth checking out. After the album release though, this trio actually all went their separate ways. Benjamin Curtis joined Tripping Daisy, which is possibly one of the biggest bands to come from this scene, and he was their drummer from 1997 to 99. At the same time, Josh Garza was also making his drumming presence felt across bands, initially with the group Comet. just proving sometimes the sheer talent that flies under the radar. Comet are also another band worth taking a look at if you're into your 90s alternative rock. They have a much wider psychedelic and warm sound than UFOFU, with a Smashing Pumpkins or even My Bloody Valentine aspect, but with one difference: a fucking huge drum sound, which we'll become a lot more familiar with as this video continues. Comet's album Chandelier Musings was released in 1996, but the band eventually split the year after following a crash of their touring van. I don't believe anyone was seriously hurt from what I read, but the incident was enough to kind of kill the momentum of the group, and the members separated. Garza then partnered up with vocalist and guitarist Regina Cellu in a kind of lo-fi, indie, shoegazy, and sometimes quite avant-garde band called Captain Audio. And this is where Brandon Curtis comes back into the picture. Brandon joined up with Captain Audio to make them a trio just in time for them to put out an EP called My Ears Are Ringing But My Heart's Okay, and then a full length called Luxury, or whatever it is, whatever is better to be loved than feared. This band is also great. There was so much great music in this scene, it's quite hard to fathom. I've put together actually some of my favourite tracks and linked it in a playlist below, so do feel free to check that out. Out of all the projects, this is the one I think that would be closest to what would ultimately become Secret Machine's sound. Garza's big crunchy drum tone is here, and Brandon's melodic lead vocals and keys and bass are starting to come through. It's all coming together at this point. In 1999, Tripping Daisy, who had been one of the more successful acts from the Dallas scene, called it quits after the sad death of their guitarist Wes Berggren. This left Benjamin without a band. However, at the same time, Captain Audio had kind of begun to fizzle out. And so while their band had folded, Brandon and Josh had always been talking about a move to New York to start something new.
We need to leave town. We need to either go San Francisco, Chicago, or New York. That was kind of like our three options. And the only reason we chose New York was because it got us closer to Europe, closer to England. That kind of, we knew that was what we wanted to do, is get to Europe and play shows there, because we felt like what we were doing would be kind of accepted a little more, in England and Germany. And it just seemed like, or at least we thought that in our heads, you know what I mean?
Benjamin hopped on board, putting down drumsticks in favor of a guitar, and the Secret Machines were born. This then takes us up to the first release from the band, September 000, an initial EP announcing the band and their sound. The first track, Marconi's Radio, immediately draws you in with a long, atmospheric but melodic intro. The bass and guitar noise kind of reaches a fever pitch under the electric piano, and then it breaks down to Brandon's recognizable vocals, joined by emotive guitar and very Pink Floyd-esque backing vocals and harmonies. This is a bold statement from a band that, although would certainly continue to evolve, grow and expand, they sound really confident here in their direction.
So we're like, look, if we're going to move to New York, we got to have at least some songs, a demo. It was the September, because we recorded September 2000. That's why we called it September 000.
There's no hesitation in straight away just jumping into their own 7-minute Floydian opus. And it's both a blessing and a curse, having traced the prior careers of the individual machines. Blessing because you hear some great music, but a bit of a curse because it kind of shatters that illusion of this band like emerging from nowhere in this fully formed state. If you listen to Comet, if you listen to Captain Audio, and to a certain extent bands like Tripping Daisy, you definitely see the genesis of what Secret Machines would become. September 000 definitely has its own thing though. It's the space rock, it's the classic prog, it's the krautrock influences that are added to the mix of that psychedelic indie scene from Dallas that creates something altogether new and really exciting. My favourite track on this little EP is definitely What Used to Be French. I just love that pulse and those really raw but sensitive sounding guitars, and then there's all these like panning loops towards the end of the track, which is really cool. This is a hard one to pin down on streaming in the UK. I had to use a VPN to listen to it on YouTube, but it's one to hunt down for sure if you can. Okay, so flash forward a couple of years and a major label signing later, and we get Now Here Is Nowhere. Celebrating its 20th anniversary this year, the album is a stone cold space rock classic. At a time when gritty indie and all that other stuff was the pinnacle, Brandon, Benjamin and Josh decided to just go off planet. The record starts with this massive sounding first wave down, which builds over the course of nearly 9 minutes, its throbbing bass acting as its center of gravity and kind of pulling everything towards it. And this is followed by Sad and Lonely, which builds more of a bluesy kind of BRMC groove from a similar kind of beat, but features some surprising sing-along moments that emerge from the soup, showcasing the band's love for a hook amidst the long-form jamming and krautrock repetition.
Well, we want to do it ourselves, and they're like, well, that ain't happening. And we're like, all right, fair enough. You know what I mean? I get it. But we were like, okay, how about this? You let us record it the way we want to record it, and we'll mix with whoever you want us to mix with, or or give us a shot, and we'll mix with that guy. So they were like, that sounds good. That sounds, because that way they're kind of, make sure it's at least mixed well.
Leaves Are Gone is a very quiet piece that builds with organs and vocal harmonies and creative but restrained drum parts that build into its conclusion. And it's a nice departure actually from the big drums and distorted bass of the surrounding songs. Some of the songs meander the further that you go into the record, but the tightness of the performances and the amazing production do a great job of keeping the listener engaged throughout. This is one of the best debuts of the 2000s. It could well be my favourite Secret Machines album, but it does have some strong competition, as we'll find and come through. Just a year later, to support the promotion of their debut, the band released an EP. Led by the Now Here Is Nowhere highlight, The Road Leads to Where It's Led, the 6-track, near 40-minute release featured a brand new original called Better Bring Your Friends, which is a uncharacteristically quite raw but cool track.
It wasn't around during the Now Here's Nowhere sessions. It was just something that kind of came up, and we were in the studio, and it just, I think we learned it when we recorded it. Like, right. We were just, let's just do this, and it was like this song that really, it was a good live song. I think we were maybe throwing it into rotation live. It was like this good rocker. It was a different vibe.
Followed that by 4 covers. They did Astral Weeks by Van Morrison, Money, That's What I Want by the Beatles and many other bands, Girl from the North County by Bob Dylan, and then Deluxe Imawida by Noi-related project Harmonium. These interesting cover choices are made more interesting by the band's completely out there arrangements. Astral Weeks is given a heavier, darker composition, while Money and Girl from the North County are expanded and twisted far beyond recognition in a way only the Secret Machines could pull off. This isn't an EP I personally go back to much, but just because these are kind of long songs are stacked back to back to back to back to back, and sometimes I think they kind of lack some of that Josh Garza drumming potency that I tend to love on all of the Secret Machines material. But I absolutely love that the band did this, and it is definitely well worth a listen. Another year later, and Secret Machines put out their second full-length album, 10 Silver Drops. The soundscapes are just as enveloping as Now Here Is Nowhere, but with Alan Moulder on mixing duties, everything just kind of sparkles and shimmers just a little bit more. The pop sensibilities of Brandon Curtis's songwriting are brought a little more to the forefront on this record, and as a result, 10 Silver Drops manages to scratch the same space rock itch as the debut, all the while being a little more accessible and a little more cathartic. The choruses on All at Once and Lightning Blue Eyes offer a slight touch of an 80s new wave aesthetic into the psychedelic krautrock mixture. I naturally gravitate towards the slightly grittier, slightly darker aesthetic of the debut album, but this record offers a different perspective on that sound that you can't help but cheer for. When a song like, Lightning Blue Eyes sweeps you up in that huge chorus, it's pretty euphoric. Sadly, 10 Silver Drops really kind of marks the close of the first chapter of Secret Machines and opens a new, quite turbulent one. Shortly after touring for this album wrapped, guitarist Benjamin Curtis announced his intention to split from the group to form a new project, the School of Seven Bells. Now, Seven Bells are another trio with twins Alejandra and Claudia de Haza, and it's quite an interesting project, sharing some of the same sonics as Secret Machines in the kind of atmospheres that they create, but with all the tracks written with only vocals first. The instruments like guitar, synth and drums are basically only dressing around the harmonies of its Nevertheless, Secret Machines moved on, with the duo of Brandon Curtis and Josh Garza then enlisting fellow Dallas musician Phil Carnitz, an old colleague of Benjamin's from the Tripping Daisy days, to join on guitar and round out the trio. The resulting self-titled record came out in 2008, and it's an interesting one. It's hard not to listen to this after 10 Silver Drops while being aware of the lineup switch and not subconsciously feel like something is missing. But to be fair, something is missing in the jump from Silver Drops to this, but actually it's not so much the personnel changes. While Phil Carnitz does, I think, seem to deliver a more overall riffier approach to the guitar parts here, I think this is actually more symptomatic of a tonal shift. This self-titled record moves away from the blooming, sparkling sounds of tracks like Lightning Blue Eyes and goes real dark, even darker, I think, than the debut, with crunchy, robotic riffs like Last Believer Dead and Atomic Heels. This is the band's dark horse in the catalogue. It's come to really grow on me, and I actually love the heaviness of this record. If you love those blown out crunchy drums from Josh Garza on the debut, it's dialed up even more so on this one. While that third Secret Machines record is an underrated banger, in my view, it sadly wasn't set up for success. The band's distributor for the record, which is World's Fair Records, folded almost immediately after the album's release, and while the live show was as ever greeted fondly by the Machine's cult following, the band fell into darker times. But unlike other bands who would just kind of allow the bad fortune and gathering darkness to break them up, the Machines actually kind of leaned back into the music and begun recording a follow-up called The Moth, The Lizard and The Secret Machines in 2009. However, the free-form nature of these recording sessions led Brandon into a bit of a never-ending cycle of editing and agonizing over the music, and the project was ultimately shelved. We will get back to that though. Things then went quiet for a while until the hopes of fans were kind of stoked again with the release of Like I Can, backed with Terrible Light, a single in 2010. These are a couple of really cool tracks that see the band in once again a completely kind of different mode. Like I Can features Garza's huge booming drums, but with the majority of the chord progression being carried by Eleanor Rigby-esque strings. However, the release kind of proved to be a one-off, and at this point a true hiatus began. It was right around this time that Brandon joined Interpol as their touring and sometimes studio keys player, and Josh moved to California, where he sat in many studio sessions, bringing his Bonham-esque drum style to numerous projects, one of which I think most interestingly being a project with John McBain, who is the guitarist from Monster Magnet, the stoner rock band of all people. Throughout the 2010s, not only would Brandon tour and record with Interpol, but he'd join the members on their various solo records as well. He performed on Paul Banks's Julian Plenty Lives EP, as well as drummer Sam Fogarino's Empty Mansions record. The latter is a definite must to check out for Secret Machines fans. It's dark in a Joy Division kind of way, but there are these psychedelic flourishes that are no doubt aided by Brandon's contribution. So while the Secret Machines weren't making music together, each member had found new projects and their unique musical signatures could be heard underneath now the songwriting of new collaborators. All was well, until in 2013 Benjamin Curtis tragically passed away after a short battle with a really aggressive form of lymphoma. While Secret Machines had of course been inactive during this time anyway, Brandon later admitted in an interview with the New York Times that his brother Benjamin's death, of course, as you would imagine, just had a deeply profound effect, and for a time he considered stepping away from writing music altogether. Gradually though, Brandon returned to his calling, and amidst further touring with Interpol, he formed the band Cosmocide, which became a vehicle for a number of songs he had been working on prior to Benjamin's death. A few tracks of this project are available online, and it's fair to say this project is essentially Secret Machines by a different name. I think going out under a new project was simply a matter of Josh and Brandon just both living on opposite sides of the US at the time, but in 2016, Garza attended a Cosmocide show and got up on stage to play Alone, Jealous and Stoned. Flash forward then to 2020, and in the depths of a bleak pandemic lockdown, when there wasn't a whole lot of joy to be found really in anything, I was just blown away and excited to hear of the announcement of a new Secret Machines record. Awake in the Brain Chamber is an incredible return, to me matching up with the band's brilliant debut, and it was such a joy to get this during those lockdown days. Garza and Curtis sounds energized, and they really want to honor their own legacy and of course their much loved departed brother Benjamin. The album features a few tracks that Curtis had been road testing during the Cosmocide days, like Talos Corpse and Everything Starts, but these iterations are blessed of course with the iconic drums of Garza. This is one of their best albums, I think, and barely a couple of years with them pass after that surprise reunion, and in 2022 fans were then treated to an additional EP of music called Day 21, and these are new songs worked up by Josh and Brandon as they were putting the finishing touches on the Brain Chamber record. Matrons off this EP is one of my favourites, with a really quite unhinged process and octave filtered bass part leading this kind of driving shuffle. Don't sleep on this EP, particularly if you enjoyed Awake in the Brain Chamber. At the same time as Day 21, their band also released another EP called Dreaming of Dreaming, and these were interestingly songs recorded way back in 2008, immediately after Benjamin originally left the band, and prior to the recording of that third Secret Machines record. These tracks were produced when guitarist and producer Peter Mavrogeorgis invited Josh and Brandon over to his new studio, and at the time Jim Sklavounos, future drummer for Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds and Grinderman, was also there, and so these tracks also feature contributions from Mavrogeorgis on additional guitar and Sklavounos on additional percussion, which is really cool. The main track, Dreaming of Dreaming, is classic Machines building around a central dark pulsing riff. Probably the story of this EP coming together is maybe, you'd argue, a little more interesting than the songs themselves, and it's great to have them in the collection. They're really cool nonetheless, especially as it documents this kind of precarious. That takes us to 2023, and clearly the reception of Awake in the Brain Chamber had inspired the band to go back, and after releasing Dreaming of Dreaming, Josh and Brandon finally finished the abandoned 2009 sessions for The Moth, The Lizard and The Secret Machines. And this is an album that had been sat on and put on the shelf for well over a decade, and yeah, we got to hear it last year in 2023. I think it's worth noting before going in to listen to this, even as a fan, that The Moth was always going to be an unconventional record, even without the 15-year kind of gestation period. This was obviously conceived in that post-third album era after Benjamin's departure and the label collapse. It was a time of, I think, much strife, and as a reaction the Machines took a much more kind of free-form and abstract approach to composition to try and, I guess, just lean in and exercise their demons. And as such, while this record retains a lot of the characteristics of the Secret Machines, you know, spacey atmospherics, massive drums and fuzzy bass, the actual songs are sparse. I think knowing this up front is helpful, because after riding the wave of Awake in the Brain Chamber, you could easily be a little bit miffed, as I was on my first listen. Over time though, you start to hear how the jam-based impressionistic approach garners some great Secret Machines moments. Last One Out and Run Out the Silver Light in particular give off a post-rock, almost Godspeed You Black Emperor vibe. The Answer is a driving, hypnotic slice of krautrock, which leads into my favourite, which is Crucifixion Time. This is a Frankenstein of a track, half classic Machines and with fuzzed out spidery riffs and half like a dreamlike meditation. And there we are. A full retrospective of Secret Machines up until this point, though hopefully not the end of the story. If you didn't know of this group before, I'm hoping this video inspires you to check out the band, and if you're a fan, hopefully you might have learned something that you didn't already know. Do check back here in a week's time, where I'll put up my full conversation with Josh Garza. It may already be in the description if you're watching this in the future. And check out the playlist links in the description for some of my favorite Machines tracks and others from related groups. Check out any of my other videos below. Ulterior Underground is an ongoing series. And if you're willing to do that, you may as well subscribe, stick around, share some thoughts, show some love, or just tell some abuse in the comments. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care, mate. Mind how you go. Cheers then. Bye.